I don't know who this Ted Cruz guy is, but somebody's spending a lot of money to convince me he's a terrible person. Which is sort of weird, because I've known him about 15 years. And I've always kind of thought he was a hero. Well, I guess if the consultants tell me he's a bad guy, he must be. Because they wouldn't lie to me. Would they? Ted Cruz, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fantastic.
It's a big day. Rick Santorum coming out.
Yeah, no, that was just tremendous.
Well, you know better than I do. Santorum would have won Texas if he'd stayed in the race.
He was at 65%.
Are you at 65%?
Not yet, but it's not election day yet.
So hold on a second. Brian, can you play that little montage again? Brian McDonald, one of our producers here, put together a little montage of all the evil things being said about you. Brian, can you fire that audio again of they're saying you're the worst guy. I didn't know all these horrible things about you, Ted.
Well, that's a sign they're scared.
Well, I've always said that the most dangerous time in a campaign is those last few days, because then people can say anything they want, and by the time the truth comes out,
yep.
What did Mark Twain say? A lie will get halfway around the world before the truth can get his britches on?
That's exactly right. And, I've told people from the beginning, by the end of this, David Dewhurst is going to tell you I am a one-legged leprous axe murderer. And it's, look, the moderate establishment will cling to power with all of its might, and they're spending millions of dollars trying to deceive people.
You don't have leprosy, do you?
I do not.
Okay, so let's address these. First of all, apparently the Chinese government calls you to go out and murder people in courtrooms for hire.
Well, that's an attack. That's where Dewhurst has put the most money. He's put over $5 million on that attack, trying to convince people I'm a red Chinese communist. It is a complete and utter lie. It is based on a series of falsehoods, one after the other. Let me tell you the two that are most important. Number one, the man Dewhurst tells you is a, quote, American manufacturer, the man he features in every one of his ads. What Dewhurst doesn't tell you is 20 years ago, he moved his entire factory to China. So this was never a lawsuit between a Chinese company and an American company. This was a lawsuit between two Chinese tire factories, and it didn't impact even a single U.S. manufacturing job. Now, Dewhurst knows that, and he's deliberately not telling Texans that. But the second big lie is he tells you this case is my record on U.S. intellectual property. I didn't even argue this case. If you want to know my record, I'd suggest folks should look to a case I did argue, which is in front of the U.S. Supreme Court last year. I represented a major manufacturer against a Chinese company that had stolen a U.S. patent. And at my urging, the Supreme Court, by a vote of 8-1, upheld a $5 million verdict against the Chinese counterfeiter. That's my record. Dewhurst knows it, and he's deliberately not telling Texans that because he wants to distract them from what matters, which is a comparison of his record, which is a record of increasing taxes and increasing spending and compromising with Democrats, and my record, which is a record of fighting for conservative principles over and over again and winning on a national level.
But wait a second, Ted Cruz. You're telling me that because after you left being Solicitor General arguing cases before the United States Supreme Court, many of them great cases, which we'll get into in a moment, that you went out and tried to make a living for a couple of years instead of just going from government office to government office. And the huge law firm with, I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands of people that work there, are you telling me that you can't be responsible for what every other person does there without you? That's like saying that I shouldn't be responsible if one of our reporters goes and votes Democrat, and some of them do.
Well, that's exactly
That's just
right.
crazy talk. Next thing you're going to tell me is if a guy that lives 3 doors down from me murders somebody, that I'm not responsible for that.
You know, guilt by association and distraction, it's the same game Obama's playing. You know,
but Ted, let's not underestimate.
Yeah.
If you put $5 million behind it,
exactly.
So after a while, if you say it enough times, it must be true.
Yeah. Well, and you know, a related attack. So Dewhurst Super PAC is running an ad that says ominously, Ted Cruz's law firm gave $200,000 to Barack Obama. As you pointed out, I work at a huge law firm. It's got 3,000 employees all over the world. It so happens some of those employees are Democrats. The law firm's never given a penny to Obama. I've never given a penny to any Democrat. And I have no control over what other people who happen to work the same place I do choose to do. Now, the irony of that attack is Dewhurst doesn't tell you that David Dewhurst has twice contributed to Democrats out of his own pocket. But he wants instead, he just wants to confuse people. And the terrific thing, Michael, it's not happening. It's not working. Despite spending, this last week, Dewhurst and his super PACs are spending $4 million in nasty false attack ads, and yet our numbers keep surging because conservatives are uniting behind our campaign.
Is there a single Tea Party group in the state of Texas that has supported anyone other than you, Ted Cruz?
I am not aware of one, and I've never met a single Tea Party activist who's supporting David Dewhurst. And the reason is simple. What said it perfectly was actually the Houston Chronicle's editorial, which I would encourage every one of your listeners to go read. Because they said in their endorsement editorial, they said, we want a senator in the mold of Lloyd Benson or Lyndon Baines Johnson. And David Dewhurst is our man. Because for 15 years, he has been a bipartisan compromiser. He hasn't.
Teddy, can you hold on just a moment?
Yep.
Ted Cruz, candidate for U.S. Senate. That's pretty good standard. If the Houston Chronicle endorses David Dewhurst, you got to figure Ted Cruz is your man. Stay tuned.
The D.C. insiders are scared when they spend millions of dollars attacking Texas conservatives.
The Washington insiders have come to Texas. Washington insiders.
Washington special interest groups. Ted Cruz has too many ties to Washington.
D.C. double talk.
Ted Cruz, who are all these D.C. insiders that are supporting you? Is that the state Tea Party leaders here? Is that the local Tea Party leaders here? Is that the folks that I know that are good, honest, decent people that are activists here in town that support? Is that all those D.C. insiders?
That's exactly right. It's just about every Tea Party leader. It's Republican women. It's conservative activists all across the state of Texas. We've got 21,000 donors all over Texas, all over the country, and just about every major conservative leader. You know who they're calling D.C. insiders? They're calling Sarah Palin a D.C. insider. They're calling Dr. James Dobson a D.C. insider. They're calling Sean Hannity a D.C. insider and Mark Levin, and they're calling Michael Berry a D.C. insider. I know that's a surprise to you.
I sort of am. Kind of a D.C. insider and everything.
Look, the folks who have rallied behind our campaign are the conservative revolutionaries. They are the people leading the Tea Party tidal wave that is throwing out the establishment career politicians in Washington. If you look at who has circled the wagons around David Dewhurst, it is every lobbyist in the city of Austin. It's just about every lobbyist in Washington who make their living keeping the gravy train going. They want government to spend and spend and spend, and they never want to rock the boat. The folks who have come behind us, the 5 strongest fiscal conservatives in the U.S. Senate, Jim DeMint, Mike Lee, Rand Paul, Pat Toomey, and Tom Coburn, I'm the only candidate in the country who all 5 of them are supporting. Ron Paul has endorsed me in this race. We've got the people who are fighting to take this country back have unified behind this race. It's been called ground zero in the battle between the moderate establishment that wants to hold on to power and the Tea Party tidal wave that swept the country.
Ted Cruz is our guest. Rick Santorum coming out today and endorsing him. Your position on illegal immigration?
I strongly oppose illegal immigration, categorically oppose amnesty. Look, we've got a crisis in illegal immigration. We need to do everything humanly possible to solve it. Neither party is serious about it right now. We've got to use walls, we've got to use fences, we've got to use technology like helicopters and drones with infrared, and most importantly, we've got to have boots on the ground. I intend to lead the fight to triple our Border Patrol so that we don't just reduce illegal immigration, we drop it to zero because it's a law enforcement necessity and it's a national security necessity.
Well, now, Ted Cruz, David Dewhurst has come out in the last moments of the campaign. You'd think that this was the kind of thing you would have said early, he would have said early, but at the last minute when you would have no chance to respond, he says that you're pro-amnesty.
Now that's just silly, and he knows it. He knows that he is. I have always opposed amnesty, categorically, without exception. In fact, the Houston Chronicle, let's go back to the Chronicle, just a few weeks ago ran a story where they were very confused. We said, why is it that the Hispanic guy, whose dad fled Cuba and fled oppression, why is the Hispanic guy the strongest hardliner on illegal immigration? And the Chronicle was very puzzled because they didn't think that was possible. The irony of Dewhurst making that attack, of course, is you look at his record. This last session in the legislature, he, number one, killed the bill that would have ended sanctuary cities. And he, number two, killed the bill that would have ended in-state tuition for illegal aliens. I disagree with him on both of those. We need to enforce the law. We need to not be having benefits for people that are here illegally. And that kind of double talk, people are just, they're sick and tired.
Let's take a moment to talk about that, Ted. Mm-hmm. Let's connect the dots for people. Sure. You say that David Dewhurst, and I know this to be true, killed the bill that would have ended sanctuary cities. Now, here I am sitting here in Houston, and I know so many people that busted their hump to get Republican majorities in the House, the Senate, and the governor's office.
Yep.
There is no way we couldn't do anything we wanted.
That's right.
And yet we couldn't get a sanctuary city bill, which we were promised by our elected officials we would. Mm-hmm. Why didn't that happen?
It didn't happen because David Dewhurst didn't want it to happen. And he used his power as lieutenant governor.
But you act like he's in charge of the Senate.
He has almost total authority over the Senate and what passes and what doesn't. And let me give you an example of how he plays the game. Let's take the bill on ending in-state tuition for illegal aliens. That was introduced by Senator Brian Birdwell, one of the strongest conservatives in the Senate. What Dewhurst did is he gets to decide where to assign a bill. So he assigned that bill to a committee that was chaired by a liberal Democrat who he appointed. Now, when he did that, he knew the chances were exactly 0.00% the bill would pass because the liberal Democrat was going to kill it, which is exactly what she did. Now, what that lets Dewhurst say is, oh, I didn't oppose the bill. It just didn't get out of committee because I sent it to a Democrat to kill. Those are the games they played in Washington a long, long time. It's the exact same game he played with the TSA bill. Dan Patrick had a bill to end groping from the TSA. It had the votes, and what did Dewhurst do? He went to a liberal Democrat, Kirk Watson, former mayor of Austin, and said, round up the votes to kill the bill. So I can pretend to support it while you pull the rug out from under it. There's a reason why the chairman of the political science department at Rice University just did a study a few weeks ago looking at Dewhurst's record. And he found that there were a number of Democrats, like John Whitmire, like Royce West, like Chuy Hinojosa, that were 20% more likely to pass their legislation under David Dewhurst than were the 7 most conservative Republicans in the Texas Senate, because Dewhurst agrees more with the Democrats than he agrees with the conservatives in the Senate, like Dan Patrick, like Birdwell, like Jane Nelson, like Florence Shapiro. The Democrats are more likely to pass their bills because that's where Dewhurst is ideologically.
And it's good for people. Ted Cruz is our guest. Rick Santorum coming out and endorsing him today. Just a week ago, Sarah Palin endorsing him. It is good for people to understand that what happens in the state legislature is that Democrats don't have a majority, but if they all vote together and you take the moderate Republicans and all of the Democrats, you can actually defeat the conservative Republicans. So we have a majority Republican, but we can't win. It's why Joe Strauss is the Speaker of the House.
Right.
When most Republicans opposed him, even though we have a majority, because he got all the Democrat votes and the liberal Republican votes. So we have a titular Republican in charge, but we can't get anything done.
That's exactly right. And I'll tell you, a lot of conservatives across the state oppose Joe Strauss. But on any measure, if you look at this last legislative session, David Dewhurst's record was substantially more liberal than Strauss's. The House passed conservative legislation, and over again it went to the Senate to die because Dewhurst, number one, almost half of his committee chairs are Democrats, so they kill the bills. And that's Dewhurst's decision. Nobody else makes that but him, and he decided he wanted to put Democrats in charge. And number two, Dewhurst keeps a rule in place in the Senate, the two-thirds rule, which says no bill can be considered unless two-thirds of the senators agree, which means the Democrats get a veto on everything the Texas Senate passes, which is exactly how David Dewhurst likes it, because he doesn't want to do anything that's going to rock the boat.
Ted, can you hold with me for just a moment?
Absolutely.
All right. Ted Cruz, candidate for U.S. Senate, is our guest coming up in the beginning of the next segment. Just got an email from my friend and his friend, Mark Levin, that he wants to call in the next hour and explain why he's endorsing Ted Cruz for the United States Senate. Stay tuned.